Hello there. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Belt Line Streetcar. This was an interesting streetcar in that it was a loop line and was a product of its time. So, let's get into the video. The origins of the Belt Line Streetcar can be found in the late 1800s. Belt lines themselves were quite common across North America, and a belt line, for those that are unaware, is simply another name for a loop line or a ring line or a circle line. Literally a line that just goes in circles. Lines such as the Circle Line in London or the Yamanote Line in Tokyo are belt lines, although they are not referred to as such. As far as I know, the term belt line is a North American thing. In the case of Toronto, though, a distinction does need to be made, as Toronto has had two belt lines in its history, and both of them actually coincided with each other for a time. In this case, there is the Belt Line Streetcar, which is the topic of this video, but there was also the short-lived Belt Line Railway as well, which will be a topic for its own future video. Of Toronto's two belt lines, the Belt Line Streetcar would be the most successful, with its history starting on September 21st, 1891. This route would be a combination of the Bloor, Spadina, Sherbourne, and King streetcars, with the route running in a loop along Bloor Street, Sherbourne Street, King Street, and Spadina Avenue. This route operated loop service in both directions, clockwise and counterclockwise, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. On December 15, 1892, the route would begin to use electric cars, although night service would still be provided by horse-drawn cars. The TTC would maintain service on the Belt Line Streetcar after they took over streetcar operations on September 1, 1929. The TTC would also maintain the route naming scheme, with clockwise routed cars being referred to as the Spadina Belt Line and counterclockwise cars being referred to as the Sherbourne Belt Line. On April 15, 1922, the Belt Line would be rerouted onto Church Street, Wellington Street, and York Street due to track work on King Street. On July 2nd, the line would now be routed along Adelaide Street. Regular service would resume on July 23rd. Service on the Belt Line would come to an end on June 30th, 1923, as the TTC favored a crosstown service on Bloor Street and separate routes along Spadina and Sherbourne. This, however, would not be the end of the Belt Line Streetcar. In 1972, the TTC would consider a proposal to use two of its old Peter Witt cars on a tourist service. This idea would be supported by businesses in the downtown core and the city of Toronto. The TTC would restore two of its Peter Witt cars for this service, with one operating on the line and the other as a spare. Service on the Belt Line would begin again on June 24, 1973, after a 50-year absence. This route, known as the Belt Line Tour Tram, would operate a clockwise loop around Queen Street, Church Street, King Street, and Spadina Street. The line would operate every 20 minutes from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on weekdays and 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. on weekday evenings. Weekend and holiday service would operate from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. Use of this line would cost a standard TTC fare. Service on the line would operate until September 2, 1973, but would return again for the next spring season. Service on the line would resume on May 14, 1974, following the same route as the year prior, although now evening service would operate until 10 p.m. Weekday service would be suspended once again on September 2nd, although weekend and holiday service would continue to operate to the Thanksgiving weekend. Service on the Belt Line Tour Tram would come to a permanent end on October 14th, ending 34 years of service across the route's two incarnations. The reasoning given for the end of the route was simply that its ridership was quite low, and even with a TTC fare, the route did not make any financial sense. The route would be picked up by a private operator which charged a higher fare, but ultimately the Belt Line Tour Tram would completely disappear from city streets in the 1980s. The Belt Line was a product of its time, a time when everything was really centered on downtown Toronto. At this time, the streetcar network primarily served the urban core, and so the Belt Line was built to link these lines together and to orbit the city center. As the network expanded further into the suburbs, the need for the Belt Line would slowly disappear. Once the Bloor streetcar became a true crosstown route, the days for the Belt Line were numbered. The TTC would attempt to revive the line as a tourist line, although this was almost certainly going to end in failure. This isn't to say tourist lines are not viable, as there are many such heritage streetcars all over North America and the world. In the case of Toronto, though, a tourism line was probably never going to succeed, especially in the 1970s when Toronto was still what some would consider a backwater town. As well, by the 1970s, the Toronto streetcar network had contracted considerably in the decades prior, and the advent of the subway network further solidified the movement away from a downtown-centric transit plan and to one that looked at expansion into the suburbs. As for a modern Belt Line, while there is likely little use for such a line, it is possible to operate today without having to construct any new infrastructure. A modern Belt Line would likely follow a loop line via King Street, Parliament Street, Carlton Street, College Street, and Bathurst Street. The route could also follow any combination of Queen Street and Church Street as well. Ultimately though, loop lines work best with a hub and spoke style system where you either have multiple lines radiating from a central core or passing through a central core like in say Moscow, or multiple hubs that need to be connected like in Tokyo. In Toronto's case, the city has long since abandoned its hub and spoke style system with all lines converging on the downtown core, and has instead adopted a skeletal style system with lines crisscrossing the city with no central hub uniting all of them. At best, a modern Belt Line would bring streetcar service to either Church Street or Parliament Street while duplicating service along the other aforementioned streets previously. At that point, the only difference being made would be on Church or Parliament, and perhaps service on those streets would be best served by independent lines. It's very likely there simply isn't any passenger demand for a loop line in Toronto's streetcar network. And with that, I will end this video here. Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it and want to see more like it, please hit that subscribe button because there are more videos like it on the channel and there are more videos like it on the way. And if there's anything you want to say about the Belt Line streetcar, don't be afraid to do so in the comments section down below. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.